The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our webinar today. Our MC is going to be Carla Casilli, so she could take it away.
Thanks, Ruby. Hi, everybody. I'm Carla Casilli. I know I've chatted with a bunch of you over the, I want to say years at this point, but it's really just months. And today we're going to be having a webinar on design. Some of this came out of the conversations that we had during our face-to-face at Duke. And we have with us today Jess Klein, who is the design lead at Mozilla Foundation. And what she's going to be doing today is we're going to take the opportunity to address what might go into the basics of a badge system design, including visual design, and also kind of some of the philosophy behind what encompasses a badge. And Jess is going to be sharing some of the work that she has been doing with the initiative that she started just recently having to do with Hurricane Sandy, so starting to build out a badge system herself. But also let me take the opportunity and talk about some of the work that Jess has done with us at Mozilla. So you guys have all seen the Open Badges website. That actually is a product of Jess Klein, so she helped us put that together, and that gives you an understanding of some of her design concepts and directions. And she's also been working with us on the WebMaker UX experience, so for webmaker.org. And so Jess has a lot of experience in not only design, but also learning, and I'm going to now let her take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Carla. As Carla mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you today about things to consider when you are designing your badge system, or maybe when you're hiring a designer for your badge project. So what I'm going to do is go over my general approach to badge design, and then deep dive by doing a critique of some DML badge winner designs. I should note that this is my process, but the beauty of design, of course, is that there really is no wrong way to do something. And you should try it and experiment, see what works for you and your organization. I will say, though, that I am the design lead at my organization, so I work on the project as a whole, from ideation to analysis to user experience and interaction design. And while you might not have a designer as heavily involved as I am in the whole process, I would encourage you to engage your designers in the entire process and not just see them as a resource, but as a thought partner, because it's going to improve your overall design. So let's just get started. I tend to ramble, so I've asked Carla to nudge me if it goes over towards the end so we have enough time to do the critique. So I would say that there really are different phases of the project. I generally start with, just trying to change slide. I generally start with research, and then I move towards design, and then as I get user feedback, it becomes kind of this repetitive cycle of design, research, research, design, until I get to a product that I feel comfortable with. So once your organization decides to move forward with badges, I would take that moment to ask yourself, what is the opportunity for you? So be realistic here. Put in all of those academic opportunities that you really are thinking about relating to learning, how to scaffold, how to do assessment, but then be realistic for your organization. Like maybe you put in, increase our brand. You put in extend our reach so that we are getting noticed in venues that we normally don't have access to as an organization. With badges, you have so many unique opportunities. Really take the moment to identify them. So I made a bunch of exercises. Feel free to use this as a workshop if you'd like. Start scribbling while I'm talking. After you identify the opportunity, take the time to add your user into this equation and think about it as a user experience and not just uniquely an audience experience, because badges involve some level of action. So the first exercise I would recommend to do is sketching out what's called a user persona. Here's a user persona I made for WebMaker. This is Rachel, and really it's kind of like a biography of some sort. You're kind of like sketching out exactly who your user might be, but really but really taking the time to understand who your user is and what opportunities are available to them within your ecosystem, particularly in relationship to goals and actions. So here I have, her goal is to learn how to make web pages, but her action at the end is going to be sharing the badge on Facebook with her friends because she wants to get them more involved in her web making. I would do a minimum of at least 3 to 4 of these so that you have a variety of users who you are thinking about when you are going into your badge design, so you know that whatever you design has some level of currency in their world. And as you do this, take into account where your users are going to be earning the badges. So for example, here Rachel would be earning the badge directly in the Thimble tool on webmaker.org, which is one of our products at Mozilla. So my next exercise with that is taking that information, turning those personas into what's called user flows. Our user flow traces a user experience with your work at every single touch point in the process. So here it's like a little storyboard. So I start out with quickly sketching some milestone touch points in Rachel, my user's experience getting and then sharing her first badge. This helps us to learn about how Rachel encounters badges for the first time. And then ultimately it's going to inform all of your design because you're going to see all of the different places and assets that frankly you need to design. Now, let's go back to thinking about opportunity and think about one of the more peripheral opportunities for your organization, which undoubtedly is going to be touching on brand in some way, shape, or form. So here at Mozilla, we have Webmaker, we have Thimble, we have lots of different kinds of brands and sub-brands. And what I do is take the opportunity, take this moment to really dive deeply into this because it's important to negotiate these ideas in advance of sending pen to paper because it allows you to really understand what your badges are communicating and who you're communicating on behalf of. So with this exercise, write out all of the requirements around your brand. And again, be super realistic around this. Write out, for example, I put in badge has to have Mozilla. But there was a nice internal conversation in our organization between should it be a Mozilla badge or should it be a webmaker badge? Are we talking about the product or are we talking about the organization? So it's really nice to take this time to negotiate these kinds of ideas.
Hey, Jess.
Yes.
What about people who are just starting to develop their brand or they realize that it might be that there's a professor within an organization who doesn't necessarily want to issue a badge for their university, but actually wants to have something that more closely correlates with their course. Do you have any concepts about that? Does that tie in with the idea of Mozilla versus Webmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I think then you're talking about so Mozilla versus Webmaker there. So let's say it's Parsons is Mozilla, that's the university, and my course is, I don't know what would be a course at Parsons. It would be something like Internet Famous. And so Internet Famous is the course, and to some extent, I would say you then have to build the brand for Internet Famous. Right, so you have to start to take that time to negotiate what the brand is and make some of those decisions. Are we going to even call out the name of our organization? Are we going to associate it with a brand? Are we going to keep it separate from everything else? I would really take the time to think about it, and I would recommend not just having badges for the sake of badges. Like, your brand shouldn't be badges. Your brand should be something that badges are associated with, because badges by themselves aren't very exciting. You need that kind of content to associate it with to take it to that next level, if that makes sense.
Right, so a sense of cohesion.
Exactly. Cool. So I'm going to try to push on to my next slide. So meanwhile, the next thing that I do, but to be totally honest, I start with this the second that I start a project because I always get very excited and I want to start collecting my inspiration somewhere, is that I I put my ideas into a mood board. I happen to use Pinterest, and everyone who will talk to me, I'm like a evangelist for Pinterest, unpaid evangelist, because because you can allow multiple users from your organization to join in on the tagging of different kinds of resources. So it's a really good place to get people's buy-in and opinions who may or may not have a large stake in the project, who may not feel like they can jump into the design side, but it engages them on some level whatsoever, and so you can sort of start to understand where their head is on the project. And
So, sorry, maybe you
importantly,
can also, sorry,
oh,
maybe
go
you
on.
can also explain what a mood board is for those who are not familiar with that concept.
Oh, sure. So a mood board, as everyone who watches Oprah Winfrey would know, is the space where it's kind of like a bulletin board where you would put in a design studio, you would put all of the things that you associate and you're inspired by. So you might have your own personal mood board, and mine would be, I would have pictures of the person that I want to be, so I would have photographs maybe of designers who are super inspirational, quotes that appeal to me, colors or textures of things that I just see on the street that are really interesting, photographs that I take, anything that you can apply that eventually will inform your design in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of a loose thing, and it touches that intangible concept of, how do you want badges to make somebody feel? So I think it's a important exercise, but also it's important that you have fun in this exercise and be true to the spirit of your project. So by this point, you're more than primed to dive into the design phase. As I mentioned, I've now shifted from research into my design. And this starts with ideation and brainstorming. And I would say do this in close partnership with your content team. So at Mozilla, I work closely with Carla and Sunny, who are really focused on um, on the content and have built out with great detail what the ecosystem is going to be. But the best way to really engage someone, as we all know, happens over milk and cookies or latkes because it's Hanukkah. And so I would say you should grab a friend or colleague or Carla or Sunny, or maybe even in reality a potential user, and sketch out those ideas over coffee or said food items. Because you should remember that badges are not just like a singular user experience by nature. They're kind of the social thing. So you really want to engage somebody else while you're doing it because it's kind of like a conversation. You don't want to design in a silo. You need to work with your community to do community-based design. And once your juices are flowing with the napkin sketch, take a look at your badge system and use this opportunity with the Carlas of your world or your content team to do a bit of a clustering exercise. So you may or may not be familiar with this, but the idea is like I would take a bunch of stickies in different colors and write the names of the badges onto the stickies and literally group similar badges together. This is going to help you to identify visual themes to explore in your design. So we have this saying at Mozilla, less yak and more hack. So at this point, you really need to do that. You need to dive right into what we call a minimum viable product, just like something that you can put your idea out into the world with and somebody's going to react to. And it doesn't have to be like out into your world of 1 million people. It could be out into your world of 3 people, but just something to get you to that next level of your design. So here is, as Carla mentioned, a personal project that I've been working on called Rockaway Help. It's an organization I made to bring relief to my neighborhood in Rockaway Beach, New York that was devastated by Hurricane Sandy. We have thousands of volunteers, and now that it's over 40 days since the hurricane, we're looking for ways to recognize that community and motivate people to stay involved. So it seemed like a good opportunity for badges because we have 7,000 daily hits to our website and 10,000 very active users on Facebook. So particularly because we knew there was such a very strong Facebook community, that it would be a good use case for us trying out badges. So here's our site. What I immediately started to do is make a handful of badges for the MVP. So I wanted to start small so I can do the test. Like, I didn't want to build out the entire ecosystem of 50 badges. I just wanted to do, you know, the 5 badges that I have up here, to put them out, see if people are responding, to see if my design works. So then when I make mistakes, I only have 5 things to edit as opposed to the larger 50 plus pages. So when I mock it up, you'll see I came up with a color scheme, and I have a theme, and each of the colors represent different types of badges. So the bright blue are more about volunteer donating. The red ones are focused on more concrete skills. For example, we have a lot of people who are really good at communications and documenting, and then the light blue are more focused on community organizing. Right away, you need to apply this to the real use case. I wouldn't recommend staying in this world where you kind of have these beautiful badges in a mock-up. Like, I would actually try to put them somewhere in relationship to the content. So here we have how they're actually going to be received on the site. It's not super creative yet. It's just our way of getting something out to start with that we can iterate on later. And here's also what it would look like in Facebook. And while I'm doing this, I just want to take a second to just talk about some useful tools that I've found so far in creating. I've created like 3 badge systems so far, and these are the most useful tools for me. Number 1 is the Noun project. It has tons of really useful icons, and it's kind of crowdsourced, and it's just a really great project for you just to get an understanding of, like, if you have a picture, if you're trying to represent tree, what is a good way to do that people will recognize. Another useful site for similar reasons is Icon Finder. Again, you can just put a search term in, and lots of different icons will come up. You can also download PNGs or icon files of those icons, and it informs you about, like, the licensing on each file. And then, as always, the Creative Commons search is just really useful in general, whether you're doing kind of photo badges or things that have kind of just elements that you just can't draw yourself, or you want inspiration on drawing. I always go to Creative Commons search. Oh no.
And the thing about Creative Commons search is essentially you don't have to worry about any sort of payment or fee associated with using those images.
That's right, yes. And most times, right, and most times, if not all times, the content creator will state directly what the privileges and rights are relating to that particular piece, which is really kind of just a peace of mind for you when you're using that kind of content.
Yep, and it's worth noting too, in Icon Finder you can do the same sort of thing. You can look for things that are licensed with Creative Commons, so that when you pick up those icons, you actually don't have to, again, concern yourself with the complexities of paid licensing.
Yes. So after you've, taken the time, after I, did all the mock-ups and created something, and I would say, don't be super concerned about the fidelity of your prototype at this point. If it's just the, like for me, like I knew that the mock-up of the Facebook and the website, they weren't completely finished ideas, but they were just enough to put it in front of somebody to get initial feedback. And that's my next exercise for you. Go out there and just ask really basic questions. Put them in front of somebody, and don't just put it in front of your mom and dad or your roommates. In my case, my mom and dad right now are my roommates because of Hurricane Sandy. But in general, find your Rachel, your realistic user, and try to get a small group of people just to take a look and get a response. Have a set of questions, but be it informal, and try to keep it simple. Like for WebMaker, we do WebMaker makes me feel happy because WebMaker makes me feel sad because I have an idea about WebMaker, and you have people fill in the sentences. But it can be really a lot more informal than that, where you can just ask them frankly, like, what does this badge make you feel? How would you feel if you got this badge? Would you want this badge if you saw a friend had this badge on their Facebook page? Those kinds of questions. And so what I did was I asked my users that, and I learned, because it said to me that the badges were great and sort of playful, with the same time understanding that this was a serious natural disaster, but they weren't communicating hurricane, but they were just kind of communicating like general relief. And so I then iterated my design to include more of a hurricane kind of form, shape, a swirly hurricane shape. So I adjusted that design, and I'm iterating, and I'm going to keep iterating and going through that cycle, like I said, of research, design, research, until I get to a product that I'm happy with. And so that's kind of my overall process. As I said, it's just my personal process, and there's no right or wrong, but that's how I got to making like my first set of badges around this. And I think that in general, just being playful and experimenting will get you to that first right design, but always keep the end user in mind. So if you'd like, you can download this presentation. I put a link up here, and I can send it out afterwards as well. And the Open Badges website, of course, is always a plethora of information. And I am going to pass over my DJ torch now to Carla, who's going to help us lead the critique session. But I'm going to keep.
Yep. So you know what?
Open.
Yep. That's good. So Jess, you know what? There's a question. There are a few questions that have come in, and I think it might be useful just to address those right now.
Sure.
So Meredith at Mouse has a question about, do you have any ideas whether or not you should design external facing versions of your badges that include your organization's brand or logo or name for things like Facebook? And then kind of also, what happens when your badges are next to other badges that people have earned elsewhere within the OBI or on things like Facebook? So I guess those are kind of two separate questions. One, do you think you should have kind of different versions of the badge that you might have on your own website, and people might, versus badges that people might want to show publicly?
Those are great questions. Hi, Meredith. I would say for the first question that it does depend on your execution there. So, for example, the Facebook badge that I showed, what's important to note there is that I didn't just, when you put it on Facebook, what was happening is that it wasn't just coming up as the badge, it was coming up as the badge graphic plus the text in conjunction with that. So at that point, you really have to think about the pairing and the relationship between the copy and the tone of the copy and your badge. So that's like one instance where you have to really just think about context. But I think that it's at least I know from the WebMaker experience, we have kind of a template for what we do and how we place the badge when it's not in tool or being distributed. So, for example, whenever we have the badge on a page where the badge is being described, for example, we always have the badge graphic to the left, the Mozilla branded logo and badge name title. Can you guys still see my screen? I feel like I could. I'm not going to go hunting for that because it'll be hard to find. But basically, but the pairing, we have a system for that pairing. So basically, the answer is yes, you should have thought through your use cases, but I think that they should all read as part of the same family of graphics.
And I guess also related to that too, you've touched on a little bit, you focused on the idea of doing research on your user, and I also think that you referenced the idea of multiple audiences for your badge system. So that's kind of where you're doing some of the testing, but maybe you can talk a little bit about recognizing, so not only will your badges live in different environments, but they'll have different audiences too.
All right, that's also a great question, and it's important. So how can your badge, it's important for you to think about how your badge is going to stand out in those kinds of environments, but also not kind of read as this obnoxious kind of thorn in everyone's side, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and I would say that you should just test it out in your mockups. Like you should bring in, some other badges, from on this call, you're going to see a few more badges. You can take them and pull them into your mockups and test them out and see what works and what doesn't work. I think that that's part of the design challenge is that it's never going to be the final destination for your badge is not where the user is receiving the badge for the first time. So the important thing for me in both of my use cases so far has been um, actually not the end user, but the end user's friends.
Mm.
Um, so for me, part of it is trying to associate with other social currencies that they are familiar with. So for example, I knew a lot of people on Facebook were familiar with the kind of Red Cross, so I had like that bend. So I wanted to like reference relief, but not be the Red Cross. And then I also knew that they were interested in Foursquare. And had known that kind of visual vocabulary, and so I wanted to reference both of those, but so I could play well in that universe, but be unique in that I can be portable enough to have legibility and credibility in other environments. I know that's not a direct answer because it is so, um,
Contextual.
yeah, it is super contextual, but I would like encourage everyone on this call to try to put their mock-ups and their visuals out on Flickr or out in public forums so that you can get this kind of feedback.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I really like the idea of being able to compare, kind of put your badge amidst a bunch of other badges to see if it's communicating what you would like it to communicate, and does it get lost in the shuffle. But also, I think you make an excellent point about it being a thorn in people's sides, that you don't want to make these things like so glaring so that that's the only thing that people see. Um, So I think this is great too, and I love that what you've shared too is that you've shown the evolution of your badges, and I think that's really wonderful because I think this is exactly what we've been talking about all along when we're talking about badge system design, is recognizing that you might start with one iteration, and as you mentioned, the MVP, the minimum viable product, and then keep kind of iterating on that. Once you mentioned the research phase, and then going back and design, and then research, and then design. And I think that's wonderful. That's, I think, something we haven't necessarily addressed so directly before. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. We also have another question from Ross Higashi, and that was about CC Creative Commons SA licensed graphic resources, and whether or not it means that you need to make your combined badge graphic freely available. So if you're using something like that within your badge, does that automatically mean that that badge then becomes kind of unlicensable? And does that hurt the issuer's ability to control the badge's identity if someone else can kind of grab that and reuse it? So this is, I think, a fairly complex question, and I think it's pretty awesome that it's being asked because it shows that there's a lot of deep thinking going on about badges. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that, Jess.
It's a great question, and what's complicated about it is that there is not one CC license. So what I would have to do to answer that question is to go into the individual piece of art that you are appropriating and read the restrictions around that particular piece's um, uh, what are they called? Legal, like licensing. And so some of them,
Yep.
for example, say that you can use it and share it, no credit is needed, etc. And so they're in that situation, you would be pretty fine with just, appropriating your own licensing. But in other cases, you would be exactly in that situation that you're stating at. It would affect your own licensing. So I would read them carefully, and maybe sometimes, at the end of the day, it is difficult to use Creative Commons images in your badges, because of it adds a level of complexity to your decision in terms of licensing your own work. But I do think that it is worthwhile regardless in terms of inspiration, just to see what other people have been doing and using that for.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jess. And I see that you've inspired some people already who are asking questions about whether or not they can share their current badges so they can see alongside others, and whether or not that makes sense to go ahead and put it on a message board or use something like Pinterest to be able to share things kind of in a dynamic way. And just so people can start to get an understanding of how their badges might fit into a larger badge system, and most likely how they would look once they're in something like the backpack. So great, thank you so much.
I love
And
that.
then, yeah, it's a great, I love that you've inspired people already. That's fantastic. And so let's take a moment and talk a little bit about some of the work that was submitted so that we can get an understanding of where we're headed, where people are headed right now, and what it would be like to have a professional designer such as yourself start to look at it or think through it. And I think most of the stuff we've gotten so far has been really impressive. But the first we'd like to cover is CS2N, and that's coming out of Carnegie Mellon, and I believe it's Ross who's associated with that badge system. But please go ahead and let's take a look at that and hear some thoughts about that.
I was actually wondering if Ross, are we able to do it so Ross could speak for a few seconds on the badges before I dive in?
I think that's a Ruby question.
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself and Ross,
Ross
but
unmuted, so.
his line is open now.
Okay.
It took me a long time to unmute myself so I could tell you that.
Thanks, Ruby.
Sure.
Hey, this is Ross. I'm here.
Hey Ross, can you just tell us a
So
little
Ross,
bit
do you want to
about?
share a few
Sure. So is this the slide we're using? Because there were a couple in that paper that I sent.
Yes, so I pulled out, I'm just
Okay.
going through quickly so you can
All
see.
right.
Oh, that's
Cool.
next.
Yep. Okay. So this is a description of the hierarchy that we've got imposed over our badge structure. We did that for a couple reasons. One was to sort of establish the notion that some badges matter more than others and that they're relevant to specific stakeholder groups. So badges on the left side of the spectrum are something that a student or maybe their direct mentor or teacher would see. And as you get farther to the right, you get into the stuff that more sort of consumers, as we've called them, of badges, so the college admissions officers, whoever, would be more interested in seeing those sort of higher level milestones. We wanted to reflect that with with different visual elements on the badges. And also to make sure that we have this document available for coordinating our internal projects, because we have multiple activities and we wanted them to keep some notion of consistency between them.
Great. I'm just gonna scroll through.
So before we move on, there's a question in chat to you, Ross, about are all of these badges OBI compliant, or do you have kind of a level where you kick them into OBI?
Because it actually simplifies the coding, every badge is treated equally with regard to whether it can be exported into OBI.
Excellent.
So you could export a really tiny one, but it just the text and all the copy and all that stuff just really wouldn't indicate that, oh, this is a huge achievement, but maybe particularly attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks.
This page is a arrangement of badges that are in live use for 5 different projects. The one on the top is a STEM-focused curriculum. The one below it is a derived version for programming purposes. The one below it is a game-based activity where the badges are awarded in a Unity environment, so Unity 3D. The 2 below that are also a Unity environment, but they're variants of each other, and they are curriculum aligned. Yeah, so the ones on the left you would earn at much more frequent intervals, and they correspond to smaller things. The ones all the way over on the right represent things like basically the full completion and passing an end of course exam in some cases. for the more sort of classrooming ones.
Nice. And I'm going to just show the last slide before.
Right, and one of the notions that we have with regard to displaying badges and badge pathways is that you should be able to view these badges at different stages or different zoom levels. So this is what you'd see in a multiple course. So each of those badges is actually about course size that you see here, leading up to an industry certification. If you were to zoom in on sort of the area surrounding any one of those, you kind of picture this Google Maps like thing where you zoom in and all of a sudden the rivers have names and the townships have names. You'd move to a stage, sorry, a level where you're looking at, say, medium-sized badges leading up to one of those big badges, and maybe even the smalls that lead up to the mediums if you go far enough in. But we wanted the iconography for the badges to be visible enough that you could accomplish that without it starting to look bizarre.
Right. So I think that this is I really love the kind of visual growth and sophistication that comes with the different levels of each badge, and it actually reminds me when I worked at Sesame Street, we had kind of different badges for different kind of ages of users in one particular game. So that as they leveled up, we had like a seed that bloomed into a tree by the end of the entire pathway. And I think that it's really quite beautiful, actually, the way that you've represented it, kind of transitioning in and out of different potential ecosystems. But the things that do stand out to me is, and I understand that this is not your intended visual design, but maybe the direction that you're heading, is I would take some time to think about how detailed the graphics actually are. As it is, I actually can't tell what I'm really looking at. Um, so I do see sort of the pattern following each badge in each different oops, sorry. Forgot for a second that you guys were looking at my screen. I see sort of the expanded view, and I love the idea of sort of zooming out to get a larger view of something as the badge progresses. But I do think when you think about the detail of a badge, as you already acknowledged, you don't really know, you can only control so much when it's an open badge, exactly where these are going to end up, whether it's going to be on mobile, on a web app, on on print if a college admissions panel were to print it out or something like that. And so I would try to keep it as simple as possible so that as much consistency and as much detail can be retained as it transitions into the various different kind of platforms and spaces.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and I know that everybody is really attracted to this kind of growth aspect that you've built into badges, and again, it's kind of the powers of 10 that you're moving out through them. And it's a question too that I think is whether or not people have the capacity on the sites, the issuer sites, to actually see their badges at a more higher level. So when they're in the backpack, and this is something that I think everybody has to compete with, and it's just essentially a branding question in general. And every time there's a new identity created, you have to consider the sizes in which people view things. And the backpack itself tends to reduce them to a significantly small size so that there's not a lot of detail that can be held at those sizes. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are very interested in having somewhat complex badges. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that at all, Jess, about the idea of simplification at really small sizes, and then how do people address it when you want to have something that's a fairly complex badge. Like I'm looking at the Robots Virtual World Curriculum Companion, and that final knowledge badge is a pretty complex badge.
Right. And I think that some things are more successful than others here. For example, I think that scaling texture works really well, and scaling pattern works really well. Scaling by just adding more elements doesn't seem to work as well in general, just because it adds this layer of comprehension. So by the end, I love that you get the robot by the end, but I would maybe go with the more abstract pattern there, because it's just really hard to see the relationship and hard to read it. And the type in general is just probably going to be lost, I would say, in most forums. Um, and color is also another thing that will scale well. So, um, start with a limited palette and then maybe slowly increase it to get more variety and sophistication in the design. Um, Even if it's not the color, it might be the hue, the kind of like the opacity of that color, or maybe adding like a little bit of white to that color, a little bit of gray to that color. So we'll just change it, just like be a nuance change as opposed to like an all-out new element into the badge, because it just adds that much more of a challenge for the viewer to understand what they're looking at. But you know what I do like about this piece with the robot is that it's a little bit on the more playful than the majority of the badges that I see here on the CS2M page. And I think that it's because I think that play is an element that's kind of missing, and I would worry that this would feel in general like a substitute for a grade when it has this opportunity to evoke so much more than being just an equivalent of a grade. So I would encourage you to continue down this pathway of starting to think about like what are the elements that kind of um, inspire and and motivate beyond just the the curricular type of aspects. Um,
Cool. So I want to keep us moving, and we have possibly two more badge systems.
I believe just one more. I just want to say actually one more
Sure.
thing before I transition. Um, this slide that I have up here, which is the ecosystem map, I see a lot of different organizations trying to play around with this particular space, and I think when I was talking about play being, an important aspect of the badge design, I would encourage you here to use the map as a chance to communicate playfulness and explore your brand. Like I loved your metaphor of the maps and the worlds and the lands of exploring. I think here's the place to do that.
So
So
there's sorry, I just want to throw out, there's a specific interesting tension that we're actually experiencing in that area. And the reason for that is that we're operating in a space, robotics, competitions, and informal education, where people actually suffer from a lack of direction. So we're
Mm.
trying to balance suggesting a course forward to a population that typically actually just disappears after a certain point because they have no idea where to go next, or that there even is a next,
great.
with making it too linear. And if actually the illustration here is of one that is specifically linear, but we also have sort of branching versions of this, and in some hypothetical ideal world, it would actually be almost tree-like or web-like.
Have you seen there's this great project which I know is on Kickstarter, and I know they have a website now called Crafty. Um, it's kind of like a game system, but what they do is they have they have kind of like trees um, that basically tell you how to go to the next level, but they're really organic, but you totally understand based on that how to transition, how you could transition from one level into the another. It's a gaming platform, um, but but it shows linear pathways, but also shows you kind of that you could pop around their constellation map. So I would take a look at them and just look around and see what other people have done. But I think this is it's like a great wireframe, but I would make sure you don't leave it in this format. You kind of challenge yourself to get to the next level.
Yep, thanks for that's great
Cool.
advice.
Cool. I'm going to move
Thanks so
on.
much, Ross, and sharing. Yep.
Thank
So we're going to move on to Jean-Philippe and BuzzMath. So if he can possibly be unmuted.
Okay, he should be
Hi
on the line.
everyone. Yeah,
Great, thank
I'm
you.
there. Okay. I'd like to start with the other slide, if it's possible.
I will
Um,
try.
Perfect.
This is challenging my,
Okay,
okay.
good.
No, there we go.
Okay, good. So, hi everyone. I'm JP from BuzzMap. I'm the creative director here. We're based in Montreal, so you will probably hear a French accent. Um, so basically, I will try to do it very quick in a minute or two. We have three types of badges. We have the content, knowledge badges, which are really the core, the main badges. We also have the process, knowledge badges, and the achievement badges. I'd like to concentrate for the next minute on the content, knowledge badges. And I just want to say first that they are for all the badges, and BuzzMath currently is for middle school. So we're talking about the 10 to 13 years old kids here. And for the number of badges, the content knowledge badges, we have around 15 gold badges, and then the next slide will be easier to explain this part. Yeah, that's the first example of the criterias page. So here we have a silver badge in sixth grade equation and inequalities. And what I'm trying to show is that this silver badge, what is the kind of pathways to get to this badge. So first we can see that we have a list of activities that are required. Each activity takes about between 5 and 20 minutes. And they are built from around 10 pages of math problems. In each activities, we can see the skills that are represented. Then after a number of activities, we get a challenge activity. Then if we complete this challenge, we collect the first badge, which is a bronze badge. Then we continue our route to the silver badge, then to the gold badge. So between each badges, we have a set of activities. The student will be kind of assessed with the challenge activity, then you collect a badge. And I mean, I could go on for probably an hour around the badges, but I think what's important to know between the badges, we try to make the content badges different from the two other one. The achievements are basically small goals in the system that reward positive behaviors for the students, and the process knowledge will be sent by the teacher. But the core badges are really the content knowledge that you can see on the screen. Yeah. So I'm done for my. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Can we take a quick look back at the pictures of all the badges again, Jess?
I think I can get you there. There we go.
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, I think it goes without saying that these are just beautiful. Goes without saying, but I feel the need to say it over and over. No, they're very beautiful, and I think that I like how you added this variety of with the shape of the badge, how you have kind of the content badges are all that shield, and then the process and the achievement badges are that circular shape, and you play with color to really communicate that kind of clustering that I was talking about, and I think it works really well. I would actually encourage you to figure out what the differentiators are between process and knowledge other than color, particularly because some people might see these in different states, and so I think that it would be, you could do a little bit more to reinforce that they are unique steps, unique kinds of badges. And I love the sort of what are they called? The little leaves, the Greek leaves.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't think of the word, what they're called.
Olive branches.
Yes, I'm making lots of gestures with my hands
Wait,
on
those
towards
are
my
laurel
head.
leaves.
Laurel,
Sorry,
that's the word. Laurel.
We'd get there.
And I wonder to myself, but I have no reason to believe this in terms of how they would scale. I find them a little bit difficult to read just in terms of what I'm looking at in the graphics. Sometimes, particularly, I cannot read what I believe is the BM.
Yep, Buzzmath.
Yeah,
Yep,
the
the
small
BM,
logo.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't read that, although I just attempted to. Um, so I would say to try to figure out a better solution for that because it's a little difficult to see. And then, but overall, I do like the kind of use of icons. I think they're friendly. But at the same time, as I look at the overall picture, none of them sort of evoke that same level of playfulness and curiosity as the mad professor has on the left, the character that you have. And I would
Yeah,
try to
it's Alfred.
Alfred.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would try to figure out how to insert a little Alfred into all of your badges. I don't mean that literally, but you know, something about him, that sense of sort of amazement and wonder is really there, and it's really nice. And I notice also, and I'm sure this was intentional, that the badges that are in the content areas are they seem more special and more important to acquire because they have that kind of glimmer, the sort of ding factor. So for me, it feels like it devalues the process and the achievement badges to some extent in context with each other. So I would actually user test that to see if it's true or if it's just me. And I would also do it, you know, exactly what Meredith was talking about, you know, see how these would compare in next to other badges that 10 to 13-year-olds really would find special. One of the things that I found with the Rockaway Help badges that I made is that I made all of these really serious badges that were about volunteering and donating and you know, demucking houses and things like that. And the badge that people were the most excited about was this one offhanded badge that I made called the Helpster badge, which was making fun of the fact that the majority of volunteers we get are from Williamsburg and they're kind of hipstery. And so I was like, Helpster is the new hipster. And I made that badge, and everyone wants that badge now. And so I bet there's an equivalent in the Buzzmath universe. Maybe it's the Alfred badge, you know, it's that special coveted kind of badge that would have the visual social currency that maybe the pie chart doesn't have.
Interesting. So in some ways, what you're mentioning is that, so here we've asked people kind of to develop a whole system of badges, and they're doing that to address some of the larger questions of the work that they're presenting. But at the same time, what you're suggesting too with the Helpster badge is that maybe it's worthwhile to have something extremely quirky or very hard to get, and that's something that people might be interested in too. And maybe that's like kind of the next iteration of as you start to develop your badge system and you start to feel really comfortable with it. Now, obviously, Jean-Philippe has a background in design, so he feels very comfortable about pulling these all together. And so that there's, you know, obviously these are systems too, and there's a lot of thought going into just color and repetition of imagery. And that's something that we haven't really talked about is as you're starting to develop your badge system, how much do you want to repeat the imagery that's already in there, and what are you reinforcing with that? And so getting back to what you were saying, Jess, is that maybe it's worthwhile to actually have like one great odd and quirky badge, and that's the thing that actually helps you understand who your audience is and what kind of interesting and funny things that you could actually start to reinforce that maybe you didn't know existed previously.
It might not even be a new badge per se. Like it may not be a new type of badge, but it might be just the visual imagery in the badge. Like there's one, so it's the third from the right in the purple row, with the two characters kind of hugging each other. I feel like that one has potential, you know, right there to be that kind of quirky badge that encompasses character a little bit more than the others. But what Carlo was saying is right, that you've done really well, and I think I should note is your use of kind of pattern and texture in the backgrounds, the repetition of that, particularly like you see the sort of the the background of the purple
The kind of
badges.
sunburst, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, the sunbursts.
Always the sunburst. When you don't know what
Always.
to add a sunburst.
It works really well. Yeah, the sunbursts and
So
sort of
true.
the coins and the trophies and the I really happen to like the archery badge. I think that you have a lot going on here that is worth making sure you don't lose in various iterations. So I would keep that.
So we only have about 4 minutes left, and there are a few more questions. And obviously, this is a very rich and meaningful conversation, and we can have more of this. And I anticipate we will at the next face-to-face in January. So this is exactly some of the area that we're going to cover. And you're also going to meet Jess in person at that face-to-face. So you have that to look forward to. And thank you so much, Jean-Philippe. I just want to ask a few more questions of Jess before we wrap up. There's some really good questions in here, and Ross asks, does a playful feel potentially work against people accepting badges from like a more serious stakeholder?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think playful doesn't mean comical. You know, playful doesn't mean, so oftentimes, as we all know as designers, somebody will say playful and a novice designer will change a font into Comic Sans. In that case, yes, it would totally hurt you, right? I think playful is more about that character or spirit of your badge, making sure that you are reflecting the pieces that you have in your mood board, reflecting the correct character for your organization, but not necessarily your organization, because you have to it goes all back to that user study. Like, it goes back to knowing what the opportunity and need is for your user.
You know what? And one more question for Jean-Philippe, if you're still on.
Yeah, I'm there.
There was a question from Mary about, do lower level process and achievement badges add up to the top shelf content badges?
Yeah, I was just back in the chat. No, the three types of badges are really separate. The achievement badges are kind of grade themselves, for example, 25 stars to 50 to 100, but they are not linked in any way to the content knowledge badges at this point. The process knowledge badges could maybe be linked to the content knowledge, because they are that's another story, but I mean, no, not at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Cool.
I just want to say very good feedback, thanks, and I love the idea of maybe trying Alfred instead of maybe the buzz map logo or something like that. And we just did our iPad icon, and it's all the Alfred's face that's on it. So there's maybe something there. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I do see the goggles or the eyebrows for some reason being shapes that could be repeated, but that's just me.
That's fun, yeah. And I guess the other thing too that is nice about Alfred there is that he's in the act of doing something. And because at Mozilla right now we're very much focused on the web maker and the concept of making, and that learning actually is a process of making, and making is a process of learning. I think that's one of the things that, to me, I find very much compelling about Alfred, is that he is in the act of doing something.
And that's what's nice about badges in general, because oftentimes it's not the finished artifact of what a learner has accomplished. It's really the verb of what they are learning. And so I think that's actually what's really nice about the purple badges on the BuzzMath and the growth of these CS2M badges, is that really you're accentuating the fact that it's a continual process and you're never going to finish with the badge. It's like what they say when you go to graduate school, like, just because you have a master's degree doesn't mean you're a master of anything.
Okay, so we only have about a few seconds left. We're at the hour right now, actually. And so I want to thank Jess Klein very much for joining us, and thank everyone for sharing their badges with us. And we have to look forward to seeing each other again in Irvine in January the 24th and 25th. And thanks so much, and happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you all. Happy holidays. And you can always get me on Twitter. I am Jess Klein on Twitter. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks very much, Jess.
Bye all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.